been part of our steering committee. One of them is my colleague with the Living New Deal, Gray Brechin. And Gray and I participated in that very first meeting back in July, almost 3 years ago. And then following our first Labor Fest meeting, it was on a Sunday. Friday, Gray gave a talk, and there were probably about 100 people there. And then this thing, in terms of Fight Back, just mushroomed. So, Gray, come on up and say a few words.
Thanks for being here. You know, I know this comes as a surprise to you, but there's actually somebody who has integrity in Washington, D.C., and that is the Inspector General of the U.S. Postal Service, David Williams. I'm proud to say a good Welsh name, by the way. Williams' report that Mike just talked about probably wouldn't have happened without the work that Peter Byrne did, a great independent investigative journalist. And what Williams did was to follow up and then confirm a few weeks ago pretty much what Peter said, except it's even stinkier, I think, than what Peter said several years ago in his report. Now, Mike also mentioned income inequality. And we all know, of course, that there has not been so much income inequality in the United States since the Gilded Era of the 1890s. And that's no accident that this is happening now, because in the 1890s there was virtually no governmental regulation of business. So what that meant was that the very wealthy people essentially bought the whole government. They bought the Congress, the President, the Supreme Court. They bought it all. And consequently, they looted the public domain. There's actually a book called The Looters of the Public Domain by somebody named Stephen Pooter, who was one of those looters. And he tells how it was done. That book is called Pooter's Looters, by the way. He told how it was done in the case of the great timber frauds of Northern California and Oregon. And it was basically because they owned the government. Well, it got so outrageous that then Teddy Roosevelt put in some restrictions, and then it was deregulated again in the 1920s, and income inequality increased greatly, and some people made a huge amount of money, a lot of other people lost money, and more people lost money, and then the whole thing, as always, crashed. And then Franklin Roosevelt came in and realized that we would probably have a revolution if he didn't do something about this, and so he put in place regulations that basically kept government fairly honest, compared with many other governments like Italy, etc., up until the 1980s, when the anti-FDR Ronald Reagan came into office and began the process of repealing those regulations. And wouldn't you know, exactly what you would have expected, the Reagan administration was one of the most corrupt in U.S. history. That's not the way that young people remember that genial actor who rode to the White House on hatred of this town, Berkeley. And so it was incredibly corrupt, but in fact it's gotten more corrupt along the way, because those who have the money become wealthier by their control of the government and by looting the public domain. Except that now it's not on the outskirts of the city. Now it's the most valuable pieces of property often in every American city and town. It's the post offices, the postal properties. A portfolio which is worth an estimated $80 to $100 billion for anybody who could get their hands on it. And as Mike and Harvey said, CBRE got its hands on it. That was no accident. They wanted that contract so badly they had a pursuit team go after it. And it couldn't have hurt that the chairman of the board and basically the creator of CBRE was married to the most powerful senator in the U.S. Congress at that time. And that they have ranches and mansions where they can have dinners for powerful people. That's the way that power really works. So it happened, and our post office, of course, went up for sale. But the the OIG's office has come out with this report, and now we've actually won in court, at least to save our post office. And because we're hoping, and Jack has been very, very active in that with the National Post Office Collaborative. We want to serve as a model for other towns around the country to let them know that it doesn't have to happen. They can fight back, and that's what's happening. Now, what's been most disappointing to me as a former journalist in all of this, it's not something that I had expected, because what's going on is so outrageous that what really surprised me was the total dereliction of what's left of the U.S. press in covering this story. That's why most of the American people have no idea what is being stolen from them. And I make several exceptions. Peter Byrne, above all, Judith Shear, who's been covering this very, very diligently for the East Bay papers, the East Bay Express, which is still independent and gives us investigative reporting, Will Parrish, Darwin Bond Graham, a few others. But the shame, and the New York Times, but the shame of it all is that we're in Berkeley. And what's in Berkeley? The Center for Independent Reporting is right up there. Frontline is on Hearst Street. And across from that is the Graduate School of Journalism, where I've taught a class. They haven't touched this story. And I think one of the reasons is because Regent Blum, who's married to Dianne Feinstein, is extremely powerful on that campus. He's on the Board of Regents. And I would not be at all surprised that the regents have their eyes on this property and other property downtown, because they're expanding. And Regent Blum has enormous power. He's completely transformed the university at which I have an office and sometimes teach. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But I just wanted to thank those reporters who have covered this story, who are covering it now. I hope that they will alert the American people to what is being taken from them and which we all own because we paid for it. Thank you very much.